Hello everyone and welcome to the chapter number 62 of Blender Master Course, Introduction to Particles. In this chapter, we'll be understanding about the fundamentals of particle system in Blender, the different settings and the options available in particles. And for anyone who is new to this course, you can watch the previous 62 chapters of the Blender Master Course from the link of the playlist given in the pinned comment. Now the first question which arises is that what exactly is the use of the particle systems? So the particle systems are used to simulate effects like fire, dust, clouds, smoke, and also for creating things like hair, grass, fur, and other strand-based objects. Now to practically understand about the particle systems in Blender, let's first delete this cube by pressing X, then press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and add the UV sphere. Now to understand about the particles, we first need to open the particle properties. And for this, click on this icon which has the name particle properties, and to create a default particle system for this UV sphere, simply click on this plus button. Now a particle system has been created, and over here you have two types of particles to select from. The first particle type is the emitter, which allows to emit the particles from the vertices or the faces or the volume of a mesh object, and then the second particle type that you have is the hair, and we'll be understanding about this type in the next chapter of this course. Now with the emitter particle type selected, if I try to change the angle, then you will notice that we are able to see a tiny particle in the form of a UV sphere on the surface of a mesh object. And in fact, to view the rest of the particles, you simply need to play the animation by pressing the space bar. And now you can see here that we have a large number of particles which are being emitted from different parts of this UV sphere. So in this way, by adding a particle system, it will create an animation where we'll be able to see the particles being emitted or generated out of the UV sphere. Now the reason why these particles fall downwards is that in Blender, the gravity settings are turned on by default, and to change these settings, you need to open the scene properties, and over here you have the gravity option turned on. And if I turn it off, then the effect of gravity will no longer be seen in the 3D viewport. In fact, if I take the pointer back to the frame number 1 and play the animation, then the particles that are being emitted are no longer moving downwards, and this is because of the absence of gravity. Now if I return back to the particle properties, then the first parameter that we have is the number, and this parameter helps you to control the number of particles that will be generated in the entire animation. By default, this value is set to 1000. However, suppose I change it to something like 150, then in this case, if I play the animation from beginning, then the number of particles which are being emitted is very low as compared to the previous one. So by using the number, you can easily control the total number of particles. Then you have the seed, which basically gives a different result each and every time you change this value and play the animation. So this parameter is only for getting a random result. And then the next thing that you have is the frame start and the frame end, and as the name suggests, these two parameters control from where the particles will start and stop emitting respectively. Since the frame start value is set to 1, as a result, this UV sphere will begin to emit the particles starting from the frame number 1, and since the end value is set to 200, therefore the particles will stop emitting when the animation reaches the frame number 200. In fact, you can even check this by playing the animation. Starting from the frame number 1, the UV sphere will begin to emit a lot of particles, and this will continue till you reach the frame number 200, and after the 200th frame, the UV sphere will no longer emit the particles, and as a result, the number of particles that are being displayed will also reduce. Now the next parameter that you have is the lifetime, and it basically means the number of frames in the animation in which the particles that have been emitted will be displayed in the scene. By default, the lifetime value is set to 50, which means that each of the particle that is emitted from this UV sphere will be displayed in the scene for a total of 50 frames. Then if you want the lifetime to be random, then you can increase the lifetime randomness from here. By default, it is set to 0, meaning that the lifetime will have no randomness, and by increasing it to 1, the lifetime for each particle will be different in the scene. In fact, you can also check this by playing the animation again. Each of these particles is now having a different lifetime. And now moving ahead, the next thing that we have here is the source, and in this menu, the first option that we have is the emit from, and with this option, we can control that from where the particles are emitted. By default, it is set to faces, and as a result, all these particles are being emitted from the different faces of this UV sphere. Similarly, if I change this to vertices and play the animation again, then you can see that in this case, these particles are emerging from the vertices of the object. In fact, to understand this in a much better way, let's add a cube in the scene. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh, and select the cube object. Let's move it in the X-axis and place it over here. Now in the particle properties, click on the plus button to create a new particle system, and if you want the same particle system which is applied to the UV sphere, then you can see that this one is saved with the name particle settings. And so if I select the cube again, then click here and select the particle settings, then in this case, all the changes in the settings in the particle system for the UV sphere and the cube will be same now. Also, in the emit from, if I change it back to faces and play the animation again, then you can see here that the particles are being emitted from the faces of the cube and the UV sphere. But if I change this emit emit from to the vertices and take the pointer back to the frame number 1 and play the animation, then now you can see in this cube that all the particles are being emitted from only its vertices. And now in the emit from, you have one more option which is known as the volume, and by selecting this one, the particles will now emit from the volume of the object or from inside the object. To see it practically, I'll take the pointer back to the frame number 1 and press the space bar to play the animation. And now you can see here that the particles are emerging from the inside of the object. And now the rest of the settings in the source tab, like the distribution, particles per phase, the jittering amount, all these things are not important because these settings are not changed often while using the particles in Blender. Then you have the cache settings, and again you don't need to make any changes in this one also, and these cache settings basically allow you to free up your memory because each and every time you play a particle simulation, your PC will calculate all the information which is required to be displayed for each and every frame in the animation. And once you save your file, your PC will begin to save all such information related to the particles in the cache instead of saving it in the RAM of the computer, and as a result it helps to free up the memory. And now the next type of settings that we have is the velocity, and by using the settings in the velocity tab, you can easily control the direction and the speed of the particles emitted. The first type of settings that we have is the normal, and this basically controls the initial velocity of a particle normal to the point of origin. To understand it in a better way, I'll take the pointer back to the frame number 1, play the animation, and if I try to increase the normal parameter, then it basically gives an initial velocity to the particles that are being emitted from the cube object normal to the point of origin. Now I'll change the normal value back to 1 meter per second. Let's also take the pointer back to the frame number 1. Let's also hide this UV sphere from the scene, so I'll select it and press H to hide. Now with the cube object selected, the next important settings that we have here is the object align, and this parameter allows you to control the direction in which the particles will be aligned. To understand it practically, press the space bar to play the animation, and now if I try to change the object alignment in the x-axis, then you will see that the particles are now being aligned in the positive x-axis. Similarly, if I take the pointer back to the frame number 1, and this time I'll change the object aligned in the x-axis to 0 and the object aligned value in the z-axis as minus 20 meter per second, then now you can see that all the particles which are being emitted from the cube are moving along the negative z-axis. And now suppose you want that each of these particles should have a random velocity, and for this we have the randomize parameter. With the value set to 0, all of the particles will be having the same speed or the velocity. However, if I try to increase it to its maximum value of 100 and play the animation again, then you can see here that the velocity of each particle is random in this case. To understand it in a better way, let's change the randomized value to something like 20. Let's play the animation again, and now you can easily see that each of the particles which are being emitted from the cube were having a random variation in the starting velocity. Some of them were very fast and the others were slightly slower, and this is because of the randomized parameter. For now, I'll reduce it back to 0, and by doing this, the velocity of each particle is now equal. Now moving ahead, suppose you want that instead of these tiny balls as the particles, there should have been some other object in the scene which can be used as the particles. And for this, let's first add a Suzanne or the monkey object in the scene. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the monkey object. Now to use this monkey object for the particles, I will select this cube and in the particle settings, go to the render tab, and in the render as, select the object. By selecting the object in the render as, we are basically telling this particle system that we want an object to replace those tiny balls that were being used for the particles. Now to choose the monkey object, go to the object settings in the render, and in the instance object, click on this eyedropper tool, and with this, select the Suzanne object. And now if I zoom in, then you can see here that we have the Suzanne object added as the particles which are being emitted out of the cube. Then if you want that all of these particles should have the same rotation as the original Suzanne model, then for this, you simply need to turn on the object rotation in the object settings. And now all these particles will have the same rotation which is applied to the Suzanne object. Now the next thing that you can change is the scaling of these particles. And for this, in the render tab, you have the scale option which simply controls the size of these particles. Then if you want each of the particles to have random scaling, then for this you can use the scale randomness. So if I increase it, then there is random variation in the scaling of each particle. So higher the value of the scale randomness, higher will be the variation. However, in most of the cases, it is advised to keep the scale randomness value to something in between 0.1 or 0.2, because in this case, even though each of the particles will have a random scaling, but it won't be like some of the particles are very large in size and others are very small. So it's practical to use a scale randomness value of approximately 0.1 to 0.2. Now if you remember, while discussing the source settings in the emission tab, I told you that none of these settings are used often in Blender apart from the emit from. However, we have this one setting over here which is kind of useful in some situations, and this is the random order. By default, this option is turned on in the particle settings, and what it basically does is that it makes the particles of an object to emit randomly from the volume. To understand this concept in a better way, I'll first turn off the random order. Then to see the new animation, I'll take the pointer back to the frame number 1, and now instead of playing the animation by pressing the space bar, we'll be using these arrow keys to move to the next frames. So I will press the right arrow key to jump to the next frame, and if I take it to somewhere near frame number 20 or 30, then you can see that all of these particles are being emitted in the same direction only, and this is because we have turned off the random order in the source settings. In fact, if we continue moving to the next frames and reach to the frame number 80, then you can see here that the direction of these particles has now changed from the negative x-axis to the y-axis. Similarly, if we now move to somewhere around frame number 120, then the direction will again change, and this will keep on happening throughout the animation. So with the random order turned off, the direction of the particles will not be random, and when we turn it on, then in this case, all the particles will be emitted in random directions from the cube object. Now moving ahead, in the particle settings, you have another category which is the field weights, and in this one, we have various settings to change like gravity, force, magnetic, wind, etc. But we don't need to understand all of these because they are not useful unless we have added some specific things like the force field or some turbulence in our 3D viewport. However, one of these settings is the most important, which defines the movement of the particles, and that setting is the gravity. By default, its value is equal to 1, and when the gravity is turned on, all these particles will only move in the downward direction, and when this gravity is turned off, then the particles will move in the random directions. However, in this case, you can see that although the gravity is equal to 1, but still the particles are moving in random directions instead of moving down. And the reason behind this is that in the scene properties, we previously turned off the gravity option. And so if I turn it on and then open the particle settings and do ensure that in the field weights, the value of gravity is equal to 1. Now let's take the pointer back to the frame number 1, and if I play the animation, then now you can see that because of the effect of gravity, all of these particles are falling in the downward direction. So these are all the settings that form the basis of understanding the particle systems in Blender. And to revise what all we have done so far in this chapter, we'll be making this simple scene with the help of particles. So first of all, let's delete this cube object. So press X to delete. Let's also delete the Suzanne model, and in the scene collection, we are having a hidden sphere. So let's delete this also by pressing X. Now we'll be adding a plane in the scene from where the particles will be emitted. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the plane object, tab into the edit mode. Let's scale it up by 4 or 5 times. Let's return back to the object mode and move it up in the Z axis. Now suppose you want that there should be some monkey objects as the particles. Then for this, let's first add a Suzanne or the monkey model in the scene. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the monkey object. Let's move it in the X axis and place it over here. Now with the plane selected, go to the particle settings, and to create a new particle system, click on this plus button. Now if I press the space bar to play the animation, then these particles will begin to fall, and to replace them with the Suzanne model, we'll scroll down and in the render tab, change this render as to the object. Then to use the monkey object, go to the object settings, and in the instance object, take this eyedropper tool, and with this, select the Suzanne or the monkey object. To change their size, go to the render tab in the particle settings, and in the scale, let's increase this value to something like 0.2. Let's also increase the randomness, so we'll keep the value of scale randomness to something like 0.15. Let's also go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and to adjust the camera view, click on this lock button to turn on the lock camera to view. Let's zoom out and adjust the camera like this. Now to fix the rotation of these monkey objects, we need to turn on the object rotation in the object settings. So let's turn it on, and now all these particles are having the same rotation as the original monkey object. And to change this rotation, first of all, let's turn off lock camera to view. Then I'll select the monkey object which is placed over here. Let's rotate it in the Z axis like this. Let's also go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and now the scene looks perfect. Also, I'll select the plane object again, and I think that we should increase the scale of all these monkey objects so that they're properly visible. And to do this, go to the render tab again, and let's increase the scale to something like 0.3 or 0.35. Let's also increase the scale randomness to 0.2 or maybe 0.25. Let's also reduce the number of these particles. So for this, go to the emission tab, and in the number, we'll reduce it to something like 400. Let's take the pointer back to the frame number 1, and to move forward in the animation, we'll be using the right arrow key. So keep pressing the right arrow key till you reach somewhere around frame number 100 or 120, and now you can see that we were able to replace the monkey object as the particles. We also reduce its size and their numbers, but in this image you can see that apart from the monkey object, we are also having some other objects like a torus object and a star. And so to have multiple particles in the same particle system, we need to do some changes in the particle settings. But before that, let's first add the torus object and also create the star so that they can be used in the particle system. So for this, press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the torus to change its appearance like the inner and the outer radius. Click on this Add Torus menu, and from here, let's increase the minor radius to a value of 0.5, and now it looks perfect to be used as a particle. So let's move it in the x-axis and place it over here. Now to make the star, we'll be using a plane object. So press Shift plus A, go to Mesh and select the plane. To focus only on the plane, press the forward / button, let's go to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad, tab into the edit mode, and to increase the number of vertices, right click and select subdivide. Now I'll select this vertex, let's move it up in the y axis and place it over here. Then to do the same thing on this side, I'll select these two vertices, then right click and select subdivide, then select this vertex in the middle and move it like this. Let's do the same with this side also. I'll select these two vertices, right click to subdivide, select this middle vertex and move it over here. Now for the bottom part, I'll select this vertex, press G to move it and place it over here. Similarly for this side also, I'll select this vertex and move it down like this. Now to make it look better, let's select this vertex and move it in the x axis. Let's also move it down in the y axis and now it looks perfect. Similarly with this vertex also, let's place it over here. Then I'll select these two vertices and scale them down in order to bring them closer. Then in the end, I'll select this vertex and move it up in the y axis. And with this, the basic structure of the star is now ready. To give it some thickness, press A to select everything, E to extrude, and this is how the star looks. Also to give it a more realistic look, we'll be applying the bevel modifier to it. So go to the modifier properties, click on add modifier, and in the generate, select the bevel modifier. Let's increase the number of segments to something like 2 or 3. Then if you want, you can even increase the amount from here, but for now, I'll be keeping it to the default value. And with this, the star is now ready to be used as the particle. And now to remove the focus from the star object, press the forward / button again, and let's also move this in the x axis and place it over here. Now let's go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and to use all the three objects, meaning the star, the torus, and the monkey object in place of these particles, we first need to create a collection of these three objects. So I'll select all three of them by holding the shift button. Then to create the collection, press M, then click on new collection. Let's keep its name collection 2 and click on the create button. Now to use this entire collection of objects as the particles, I'll select this plane, go to the particle settings, scroll down, and in the render tab, go to this render as option, and from here, select the collection. Now in the instance collection, select the collection 2 where we stored the star, the torus, and the monkey object. Now let's take the pointer back to the frame number 1. Let's also go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad and press the space bar to play the animation. And now you can see here that we have all the three objects being used as the particles in the scene. However, we need to fix their rotation, and to do this, let's first select the star object. Let's rotate it in the x-axis by 90 degrees. Let's also rotate it in the z-axis. So press R, Z and rotate it like this. Let's also reduce its size. So press S to scale it down. Similarly, for the torus object, press R, Y to rotate it in the y-axis and rotate it like this. Let's also rotate it in the z-axis and then left click to finalize. Then if you want, you can scale down this torus object by pressing S, and so finally this is how this particle scene is looking. Also, let's increase the number of particles. So go to the emission tab and in the number, enter a higher value like 600 or 800. Let's take the pointer back to the frame number 1 and play the animation by pressing the space bar. And with this, the number of particles has now increased. Now let's also give them some material. So for this, let's first go to the material preview mode. Then first of all, I'll be selecting the monkey object in the scene, and to give it some material, we need to open the shader editor. So for this, we'll change the timeline editor to the shader editor. So click on this icon and from here, select the shader editor. To create a new material, click on the new button. Now we have the default principle BSDF applied to the monkey object, and suppose you want that all the particles in the scene should have some random colors, then for this we have to use the color ramp node along with the object info node. So press Shift plus A, go to converter and select the color ramp. Let's place it over here, connect the color socket to the base color. Also in the interpolation mode, select constant. Then with the first pointer selected, let's change the color by increasing the brightness, and I'll be selecting the red color. Then for the second color, click on this plus button and change the color to any other color of your choice. For now, I'll be selecting the green color. Let's create another color. So click on the plus button again and change the color to the blue color this time. Let's create one more color. So click on the plus button again and I'll change this one to the yellow color. Now I'll select this pointer at the end, which is white colored, and change it to the pink color. Now to make all these pointers evenly distributed, click on this icon and from here select distribute stops evenly. And right now all of these particles are having only the blue color, and that's because to give them some random colors, we need to use the object info node. So press Shift plus A, go to input and select the object info node. We'll place it over here. Now take the random socket and connect it to the factor. Now you can see here that all of these particles of the Suzanne or the monkey object are now having different colors. Also, if you want, you can create different materials for the eyes and the mouth of the monkey object, and to do this, first First tab into the edit mode, press 3 for the face select. Let's deselect everything, and now we'll be selecting the eyes of the monkey object. So let's select all of these faces, then with the shift key holded, select the faces of the other eye, then to select the faces of the mouth, let's zoom in, and with the shift key holded, we'll be selecting all the faces inside the mouth of the monkey object. So let's select both of these faces, and to give them some different material, go to the material properties, click on the plus button, create a new material, and then click on the assign button. Now let's come out of the edit mode. Now for the eyes and the mouth, we'll be changing the emission in the principal BSDF. So go to emission, let's increase the strength to something like 2 or 3. Let's also change the color to the light blue color, and to view the effect of the emission properly in the scene, we need to do some changes in the compositing. So for this, go to the compositing workspace, enable the use nodes. Now press shift plus A, then in the filter, select the glare node. We'll place it over here. Then in the glare type, select the bloom settings, and in the quality, select the high quality. Now let's go back to the layout workspace, and to view the effects of compositing in the 3D viewport, click on this drop down, and here in the compositor, change this from disable to always. Now we are able to see the emission effect, and let's also reduce the strength of emission to the value of 1, and now the material looks perfect. Also, to make this monkey look slightly more realistic, we'll be applying the subdivision surface modifier to it. So you can either go to the modify properties, then click on add modifier to apply it, but a better way is to use the shortcut, which is to press Ctrl plus 2, and now the subdivision surface modifier with the levels viewport set to 2 is applied to the monkey object. Now let's go to the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and this is how the scene looks. Now we'll do the same with the torus object and the star also. So for this, select the torus from this collection 2, then go to the shader editor, click on this icon, and from here select the first material which we applied to the monkey object. Then if you want to do some changes specifically for the torus objects, then for this you can create a duplicate of this material by clicking on this icon, and now if I do any changes in the material, then they will only get applied to the torus objects in the scene. Similarly, for the stars, I'll select this plane.001 in the collection number 2, then go to the shader editor, click on this icon, and select this first material. Now to do the changes, create a duplicate of this material, and for the star object, we'll be doing some changes in the emission properties. So for the emission color, we'll be using the same color that we have used in the color ramp. So take the color socket and connect it to the emission color. Now let's increase the emission strength to a value of somewhere near 0.9 or 1, and now I think that the scene looks perfect. If you want, you can try to change the number of these particles in the particle settings, or maybe their material, or the emission power, or maybe the metallic strength and the other properties. And with this, we now arrive to the end of this chapter. Today we understood about the different settings in the particle system, the effect of gravity on the particles, and in the end, we also created this simple scene with different objects being used as the particles. And so our next chapter will be the chapter number 63, Particles in Blender Advanced Level. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, press that notification bell so that you can get timely updates about the upcoming chapters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.